Have you ever heard the name George Washington? Of course you have. He was the first president of the United States and one of the most important people in American history. But behind the famous name is a real man, someone who worked hard, made tough choices, and even had secrets he didn't want others to know. Today, we'll explore his full story, from his childhood to his greatest achievements, and yes, we'll reveal one of his hidden secrets near the end. So let's go back in time and meet George Washington, the man, the general, and the leader. George Washington was born on February 22, 1732, in the colony of Virginia. Back then, there was no United States. The land we know today was ruled by Britain. George's family was not poor, but they also weren't very rich. They owned a farm and grew tobacco. George was the oldest child from his father's second marriage. He had many brothers and sisters, and they all worked together on the farm. As a child, George didn't go to fancy schools. He learned basic reading, writing, and math at home and in small local schools. He especially loved math and measuring land, which helped him become a land surveyor when he was just 16 years old. He would walk for miles through forests and mountains, helping to make maps of the land. This job gave him knowledge of the land, and it also made him strong and tough. There's a famous story that young George chopped down a cherry tree and said, "I cannot tell a lie." But that story was actually made up by a writer after George's death. Even though it's not true, people liked the story because it showed how honest George was, or at least how they wanted him to be remembered. At the age of 21, George began a new chapter in his life. He joined the British Army to fight in the French and Indian War. It was a war between Britain and France, and both sides had Native American allies. George led soldiers in dangerous battles. He made mistakes at first, but he also learned fast. People began to see that he had leadership skills. He was brave, serious, and calm under pressure. After the war, George went back to Virginia. He married Martha Custis, a wealthy widow with 2 children. George never had children of his own, but he raised Martha's kids like they were his. Together, they lived on a big farm called Mount Vernon. George worked hard to grow crops and take care of his land, but life in the colonies was about to change forever. In the 1760s and 1770s, the American colonists became angry at the British government. The British were making laws and taxes without asking the colonists what they thought. The colonists said, "No taxation without representation." Protests and boycotts spread across the colonies. Eventually, war broke out in 1775. It became known as the American Revolutionary War. The leaders of the colonies needed someone to lead their army, someone the people trusted. That's when George Washington was chosen to be the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. At first, things were very hard. Washington's army didn't have enough food, money, or proper weapons. Some of his soldiers didn't even have shoes. They lost many battles, but George never gave up. He kept his men together through cold winters and hunger. One of his most famous moments came in December 1776, when he led his soldiers across the icy Delaware River for a surprise attack in the Battle of Trenton. That victory gave hope to the entire revolution. Over 8 years, Washington's army continued to fight. Finally, in 1781, the British surrendered at Yorktown, and America won its independence. Washington was now the biggest hero in the country, but he shocked everyone when he did something almost no one expected. He gave up his power and returned home. He didn't want to be a king, he just wanted to go back to his farm. But peace didn't last long for George. In 1789, the people elected him as the first president of the United States. At first, he didn't even want the job. He was tired and just wanted to relax at home. But the country needed him again. So like before, he stepped up and said yes. As president, George Washington helped shape the new government. There were no rules yet, no example to follow. He set many of the traditions we still follow today, like choosing a cabinet of advisors and serving only 2 terms. He worked hard to keep the country united, even when people disagreed on many things. He believed in staying neutral and avoiding war with other countries. After 8 years, George once again gave up power. He said goodbye in a famous speech called his farewell address. In it, he warned the country about political parties and getting involved in foreign wars. People cried when he left office. No one wanted to see him go. He went back to Mount Vernon to enjoy his final years. Sadly, in 1799, George Washington got very sick after riding on horseback in the cold rain. He died just 2 days later at the age of 67. All across the young nation, people mourned. The man who had led them to freedom, built their government, and refused to be a king was gone. But his memory lived on. Now, remember we said George Washington had a secret? Here it is. You might have heard that George Washington had wooden teeth. That's partly true, but not completely. The truth is even more strange. His false teeth were made from real human teeth, cow teeth, hippopotamus ivory, lead, and gold. Some of the human teeth may have come from enslaved people. This part of his life is not often talked about, but it's true. Washington had many dental problems and lost most of his teeth by his 50s. His false teeth were painful and uncomfortable. That's one reason why he rarely smiled in portraits. This secret shows us something important. Even great heroes have flaws. George Washington wasn't perfect. He had health problems, he owned slaves, he sometimes made mistakes. But he also believed in a better future. He chose to give up power twice when he could have kept it. That's what made him a true leader. So now you know the full story of George Washington, a boy from Virginia who loved math and nature, a brave general who led a revolution, a thoughtful president who helped build a new country, and a man who, despite his struggles, chose character over power. He is remembered today not just because he was first, but because he showed what real leadership looks like. Thanks for watching, and don't forget, even history's greatest names have stories you've never heard.